Hello lovers. Eleanor here. Tonight, we will embark on a journey, not across oceans or into palaces, but into the quiet heart of history where mystery still breathes. Here I sit, in my small living room, the lamp casting long shadows on the faded wallpaper, and the silence pressing in around me. Sometimes I think loneliness is like a fog. Soft, but it seeps into every corner. And no matter how many books I pile around me, it still finds me. In those hours, when the ticking clock is my only companion, I turn to the past. For history speaks when the world around me falls quiet. And tonight, it whispers of a great civilization. One that once soared with pyramids rising above the jungle canopy. With calendars that map the heavens. With cities filled with vibrant life. And then, almost without warning, fell silent. The Maya. A people whose brilliance shaped centuries. Whose temples still stand like guardians of a lost world. But whose sudden collapse remains one of the great enigmas of history. Did climate betray them? Did war tear them apart? Did disease strike them down? Or was it all of these at once? The questions echo as hauntingly as the wind through the stone ruins of Tikal or Copán. If you enjoy these journeys through time, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And while you listen, perhaps share with me. What is your favorite historical mystery? I love hearing the tales that linger in your own hearts. Now, settle in comfortably. Close your eyes. And let's travel back in time with Eleanor. When I first learned about the Maya, I was struck by how much they had achieved while much of the world was still emerging from what we call the Dark Ages. Their cities, Chichen Itza, Palenque, Calakmul, were architectural marvels. Towering pyramids climbed toward the sky. Stone carvings told stories in glyphs both intricate and beautiful. And the people mapped the movements of Venus with precision that would astonish even modern astronomers. It is hard to reconcile such grandeur with the silence that followed. I sometimes imagine walking through a Maya city in its prime. The morning mist still clings to the jungle trees. But the plaza is alive with color. Merchants selling cacao. Nobles in feathered headdresses. Children darting through stone archways. In the distance, priests climb the temple stairs, their chants rising with the sun. Then, centuries later, that same plaza, empty, swallowed by vines, the silence broken only by the call of birds. How can a place so full of life become so utterly still? It reminds me of my own home, once so filled with laughter when Robert was alive. When our children visited often. Now the rooms echo differently. The kitchen, where we once bustled together making Sunday dinner, stands mostly unused. The living room sofa feels too large when it holds only me. Time has a way of hollowing spaces, leaving behind traces of memory, like footprints that fade slowly with the rain. Perhaps that is why the story of the Maya touches me so deeply. It is not just about stone ruins, but about lives once filled with noise and warmth, now remembered only in fragments. Archaeologists tell us the collapse was not instantaneous. Over the course of the 8th and 9th centuries, great cities were gradually abandoned. Populations declined. Monuments ceased to be built. Inscriptions grew fewer, as though the voice of a people was fading mid-sentence. Yet the Maya did not vanish entirely. Their descendants live on. Their language is still spoken. Their traditions alive. It is the civilization's great centers. Its golden age of art, astronomy, and politics, that slipped away into shadow. The idea of a fading voice resonates with me. After Robert passed, I found myself speaking less and less, as if words themselves weighed too much. I would begin to tell a story, then stop halfway, the room swallowing my unfinished sentence. Sometimes I wonder if the Maya felt something similar. That sense of being interrupted, of not finishing the tale they had begun. Still, their whispers remain. The pyramids stand tall, even as roots split their stones. Their glyphs, once undecipherable, had begun to reveal their secrets. Their calendar, misrepresented so often in popular imagination, still testifies to a people who gazed at the stars and tried to map eternity. And in their ruins, there is a strange beauty, a haunting presence that tells us they are not gone. They are only hidden, waiting for us to listen. And so, tonight, I invite you to listen with me. Listen to the jungle winds that sweep through abandoned temples. Listen to the silence that follows centuries of brilliance. Listen, too, to your own heart, for it is there we often hear history most clearly. The Maya did not begin in silence. They began in splendor. Before we wander into the mystery of their decline, let us pause to see them as they once were, alive and radiant in the heart of Mesoamerica. From the Yucatan Peninsula down through Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, their world stretched wide and varied. From jungles dense with howler monkeys to highland plateaus where the air grew thin and cool. And within these landscapes rose cities. Living, breathing works of art and power. I like to close my eyes and imagine Chichen Itza at its height. The pyramid of Kukulkan gleaming in the morning sun. Its steps catching the light in such a way that during the equinox, a serpent of shadow slithered down its side. What genius of calculation! What devotion to the heavens must it have taken to create such harmony between stone and sky? In the plazas below, artisans worked clay into pots. Scribes carved glyphs into stelae, and priests traced the paths of stars on bark paper codices. This was not a people fumbling in darkness. They were masters of mathematics and time. Their calendar system still fascinates me. Based on cycles within cycles, it measured not only the days and years but larger cosmic rhythms. To them, time was not linear but a great wheel, ever turning, repeating, echoing. I find comfort in that thought, especially now in my old age. When loneliness presses in, I remind myself that perhaps life, too, is cyclical. That love and loss, joy and sorrow, repeat in some pattern greater than I can see. Perhaps Robert's voice will return again. Not in this life, but in another turning of the wheel. The Maya also built extraordinary cities. Palenque, with its palace complex and temples adorned with carved stucco figures. Tikal, where massive pyramids rose above the jungle canopy like stone mountains. Copán, famed for its hieroglyphic stairway, each step inscribed with history. These cities were not mere clusters of huts but centers of art, religion, politics, and trade. Imagine the markets where cacao beans were currency, where jade gleamed like frozen drops of sunlight, where feathers of the quetzal bird shimmered in dazzling green. And the people themselves. Kings adorned in headdresses taller than their bodies. Queens who held power and influence. Scribes bending over glyphs. Warriors with obsidian blades. Farmers tending maize fields that sustained it all. Their lives were rich in ritual. Bloodletting ceremonies. Offerings to the gods. Ball games played not just for sport but for cosmic meaning. Every action, every stone set in place, was bound to a larger vision of order and divinity. One of my favorite details comes from the city of Bonampak, where murals still survive. There we see vivid scenes. Nobles in procession. Musicians with drums and trumpets. Warriors presenting captives. Rulers performing rituals. The pain has faded. Yet the energy still leaps from the walls across centuries. When I first saw photographs of these murals, I felt as though the Maya themselves had reached through time to insist. We lived. We danced. We bled. We mattered. And yet, as dazzling as their world was, it bore within it fragility. Their reliance on maize agriculture made them vulnerable to shifts in climate. Their city-states, proud and independent, often turned to rivalry and war. Their devotion to ritual demanded sacrifices, sometimes human, sometimes their own blood, which may have strained their societies. It is a sobering thought that brilliance and fragility so often walk hand in hand. When I taught history, I used to tell my students, every civilization is both a miracle and a warning. The Maya remind us that greatness is not eternal. Even the most splendid achievements can fall silent if balance is lost. I think of my own life that way sometimes. When Robert was alive, everything felt balanced. Our days full of small rituals. Our love the steady heartbeat of the household. When he was gone, that balance tipped, and silence spread like vines across the ruins of my heart. Still, the Maya live on in their descendants. Millions today still speak Maya languages, still weave patterns that echo ancient symbols, still carry stories passed down through generations. Their civilization may have changed, but their people endure. It is a reminder that collapse is never complete. It is transformation, however painful. As I sip the last of my tea and listen to the creak of the house, I imagine the Maya at their height. Vibrant plazas, voices rising in song, the stars above carefully charted, the temples alive with smoke and prayer. And then I let the image slip into silence. For in the silence lies the question we must now face. How did such radiance fade? As I think back to the brilliance of the Maya cities, I feel the weight of their silence all the more. For every pyramid that rose to the heavens, there is now a vine-wrapped ruin. For every bustling plaza, a clearing filled with birdsong and the rustle of leaves. The story of their decline is not sudden, like the collapse of a tower, but gradual, like a candle guttering out, flickering, dimming, then leaving only smoke. Archaeologists trace this fading through patterns in the earth. Monumental inscriptions, once carved regularly to mark victories, coronations, and cosmic events, begin to dwindle around the 8th century. Populations shrink. Settlements that once thrived with tens of thousands of people grow eerily empty. Entire cities, like Copán and Tikal, show signs of sudden abandonment. Imagine walking into a palace once filled with noble families, only to find it deserted. The hearths cold. The walls crumbling. No single battle, no single catastrophe explains it all. It is as though the Maya simply drifted away from their great centers, leaving the jungle to reclaim them. When I think of those abandoned plazas, I remember the day after Robert's funeral. The house was suddenly too quiet. Our children had returned to their own lives. The phone had stopped ringing, and the kitchen smelled of wilted flowers. I walked through each room, half expecting him to be there, humming under his breath or tapping at a crossword puzzle. But the chairs were empty, the clock ticking too loudly. That is what the Maya cities feel like to me. Rooms left empty, voices cut short, spaces still holding the echoes of those who once filled them. One haunting piece of evidence comes from Copán. Archaeologists found that near the end, the city's great hieroglyphic stairway, a monument carved with centuries of dynastic history, was hurriedly reconstructed. Blocks were placed out of order, glyphs jumbled. It is as if the scribes, once masters of cosmic time, lost their grip on order itself. The collapse was not only physical but intellectual, a disintegration of the very fabric of meaning. At Tikal, too, archaeologists discovered palaces burned, monuments toppled, inscriptions cease abruptly, as though the scribes put down their chisels mid-sentence and never returned. How does a civilization that had once mapped the heavens so precisely fall silent so completely? Even agriculture, the foundation of Maya life, left signs of strain. Soil analysis shows overuse, erosion, and exhaustion of farmland. Reservoirs, once carefully managed, became choked with silt. As populations grew, the balance between people and land may have slipped. The grandeur of the cities, in the end, rested on fragile earth. It reminds me of my garden. When Robert and I were younger, we planted tomatoes each spring. He was meticulous about rotating the beds, letting the soil recover. After he was gone, I grew careless. One year, I planted tomatoes in the same place as the year before, and the soil punished me with wilted plants and meager fruit. Civilization, it seems, is not so different. Without balance, even the richest soil can turn barren. Yet, not all cities fell at once. While some centers were abandoned, others lingered, adapting, surviving. Chichen Itza rose in prominence even as southern lowland cities crumbled. This uneven decline adds to the mystery. Why did some places falter while others thrived? It suggests that collapse was not one single cause but a storm of factors, each city weathering it differently. Some breaking sooner, others later. What strikes me most is that the Maya did not vanish entirely. Their descendants live still, farming maize, weaving patterns, speaking languages descended from the same roots. The collapse was not annihilation but transformation. And yet, for the great monuments of the classic period, for the vast plazas swallowed by jungle, the silence remains profound. And so we stand in the gap between brilliance and ruin, between voices carved in stone and the mute hush of abandoned temples. Why did they fade? What forces could bring such magnificence to an end? The questions press at me like the wind against my window. Was it the earth itself, withholding rain? Was it the ambitions of kings, warring until nothing was left? Or was it an invisible sickness, creeping quietly through crowded cities? As I sit here in the quiet of my house, I realize that history's mysteries are not so different from our personal ones. Why do some loves endure, while others crumble? Why do some families thrive, while others drift apart? Perhaps the answers are never simple, never singular. Perhaps collapse is always a tapestry of causes, each thread pulling until the whole unravels. The earth can be both a giver and a taker of life. And in the story of the Maya, the skies themselves may have turned against them. Scholars now point to climate change, specifically, prolonged droughts, as one of the most powerful forces behind the decline. The Maya were masters of water management, with reservoirs, canals, and cisterns designed to capture the rains. But when the rains failed for years, even genius could not outwit the heavens. Studies of lake sediments across the Yucatan Peninsula show thin, Pale layers of dust and mineral deposits. Markers of severe droughts between the 9th and 11th centuries. These were not passing dry spells but long stretches of scarcity. Years when crops withered in maize, the sacred foundation of Maya life, failed in the fields. To lose maize was not just to lose food, but to lose the very rhythm of ritual and time. For maize was at the center of their cosmology. I sometimes picture a Maya farmer standing in his fields, the soil cracked beneath his sandals, his eyes searching the sky for clouds that never came. His family waits behind him, hungry, and the priest in the temple urges him to give more offerings, more blood, more sacrifice to coax rain from the gods. What despair must have crept in as each season passed, as rivers shrank and reservoirs dried. I can almost feel that despair in my own way. After Robert died, there were days when it felt like the rain had stopped falling in my soul. The routines that once nourished me grew brittle. Meals tasted flat. Laughter seemed to evaporate before it reached the air. Like those ancient farmers, I searched the sky, though mine was not for clouds but for a sign that life could still be fertile. In some cities, archaeologists found evidence of desperate adaptation. Reservoirs were deepened, canals expanded, even as the climate grew harsher. But the droughts were relentless, and the population, already dense in the lowlands, strained the land further. Starvation leaves few direct traces in the archaeological record, but signs of malnutrition and skeletal remains hint at the suffering. And yet, drought alone cannot explain it all. Some Maya centers, better placed near rivers or coastal trade routes, endure despite the climate shifts. Chichen Itza, with access to cenotes, natural sinkholes providing water, rose to prominence during this time. But even there, the pressure of drought left its mark, shaping rituals and politics. The famous sacred cenote at Chichen Itza, where offerings of gold, jade, and even human lives were cast into the depths, became a desperate altar to the gods of rain. It makes me wonder, when the heavens close their doors, what will a people do to open them again? How much faith? How much blood? How much sacrifice is enough to bring back the rain? And when no answer comes, how long before faith itself begins to crumble? I think of the Dust Bowl in the United States during the 1930s. Another time when the skies withheld their mercy. Families lost their farms, their livelihoods. Towns emptied as people fled west in search of survival. My parents used to tell me stories of that time, when even bread seemed a luxury. If it could happen in modern America, with trains and trucks to carry food, how much harsher must it have been for the Maya, bound to their maize fields, their reservoirs, their gods. Archaeologists also suggest that drought may have sharpened other tensions. Scarcity breeds competition. Neighboring cities, once rivals in glory, may have turned to war over resources. A failing harvest does not only starve the body, it ignites fear, anger, and violence. The drought was not merely an environmental crisis but a spark to political fire. Still, I return to the image of silence. A priest on a temple staircase, lifting his arms to the cloudless sky, chanting words heavy with desperation. A mother in her hut, holding a child too weak to cry. A king in his palace, staring at reservoirs turned to dust. And in each of these, a question unspoken. Had the gods abandoned them? Or had they abandoned the gods? In my loneliest evenings, when the house is too quiet, I sometimes ask the same of life. Has joy abandoned me? Or have I abandoned it? The Maya's search for rain, for renewal, feels achingly familiar. We all know what it is to wait for something that does not come. And so, the drought hypothesis gives us part of the puzzle. But as with all great mysteries, it is not the whole story. The skies may have turned against the Maya. But on the ground, among the city-states, another storm was brewing. If the skies betrayed the Maya, then the ground beneath their feet grew just as unstable. Alongside the droughts came another threat. One born not of nature, but of men. War. The Maya world was not a single empire but a constellation of city-states, each with its own ruler, its own temples, its own pride. For centuries, rivalry had simmered like coals beneath the ashes. When resources grew scarce, those coals flared into fire. Archaeologists have uncovered fortifications around once peaceful centers. Walls hastily built, moats dug, defensive structures rising where plazas once hosted ceremonies. Inscriptions carved on stele speak of star wars, conflicts timed with celestial omens. Battles not only of armies but of meaning. Captives were paraded, sacrificed, their names etched into stone as proof of dominance. War, for the Maya, was both political and cosmic, a way to prove favor with the gods. I think of Caracol and Tikal, two great powers locked in a rivalry that spanned decades. Their wars reshaped alliances, toppled kings, disrupted trade. One inscription even describes the humiliation of Tikal's ruler, captured and perhaps sacrificed by Caracol. These were not minor skirmishes. They were clashes that could empty cities, devastate farmlands, and tear apart fragile stability. And yet, war is never only about politics. It is about people. I imagine a Maya farmer called from his fields to take up obsidian blades, leaving behind his wife and children. I see a queen, once radiant in feathered headdress, now forced to kneel as a captive before a rival king. I hear the cries of children as flames consume their homes. The grandeur of stele hides the suffering etched into human lives. It is not so different from the wars we read about today. The headlines show maps and strategies, but beneath them lie families torn apart, voices silenced. When Robert was alive, he used to read the newspaper every morning, shaking his head at stories of conflict in places far away. He would sigh and say, "We never learn, do we?" And I, sitting beside him with my coffee, would nod in quiet agreement. History's refrain echoes endlessly. Power grasped, lives lost. There are also signs that war intensified in the very years when droughts were at their worst. Scarcity breeds desperation, and desperation sharpens blades. Competing kings may have believed that by conquering rivals, they could secure dwindling resources. Land, water, maize. But each conquest strained the fabric further, until entire regions collapsed under the weight of their own violence. At Das Pilas, inscriptions describe a spiral of warfare so relentless that the city eventually fell into ruin, its palaces abandoned. Archaeologists found arrowheads lodged in walls, evidence of sieges, charred remains of burned buildings. One can almost smell the smoke still, rising above the jungle canopy, blotting out the stars the Maya once read so carefully. What haunts me most are the personal stories that hide between the stones. One skeleton unearthed at a collapse site showed signs of multiple wounds. Perhaps a warrior who fell in a desperate last stand. Another grave, hastily dug, held the remains of children, victims of violence or sacrifice. These are not just traces of collapse. They are echoes of human pain. Sometimes I walk through the cemetery where Robert rests. The stones there are orderly, the grass trimmed, the silence peaceful. But when I imagine the Maya dead, I see no such order. I see hurried burials, weeping survivors, and monuments toppled by hands that no longer believed in tomorrow. And it strikes me how fragile peace always is. How easily order slips into chaos. Yet even amid the violence, some cities adapted. Chichen Itza, rising during this turbulent time, may have forged a different political system. Less focused on divine kingship, more on collective governance. Perhaps this was their way of surviving when others fell. But the survival of one city does not erase the suffering of dozens lost. The Maya landscape became a patchwork of resilience and ruin. Each city's fate bound to the choices of its rulers and the mercies of the skies. And here we reach the heart of a difficult truth. Collapse is rarely a single cause. War alone does not end civilizations. Nor does drought. But when hunger meets ambition, when empty stomachs march beside sharpened obsidian blades, then destruction multiplies. I ask myself, how often do we, too, let fear and scarcity push us into conflict? How many friendships, families, even nations crumble not from lack of love, but from the wars we wage within them? The Maya remind us that no wall, no pyramid, no monument can shield us when we turn against each other. And yet, war was not the final note in their decline. For even as kings fell and cities burned, another invisible enemy may have crept through their lands. One not of steel or stone, but of sickness. As if drought and war were not enough, another shadow may have crept quietly among the Maya. Disease. Unlike the drama of battles or the spectacle of collapsing temples, illness leaves faint traces in history. Whispers in bones, clues in the soil, hints in oral traditions. But to imagine the collapse without considering sickness is to miss an invisible hand that can be just as deadly as famine or swords. Archaeologists studying Maya skeletal remains have noticed signs of malnutrition, infections, and stress. Bones tell stories. Enamel lines marking childhood hunger. Lesions suggesting chronic illness. Fractures never fully healed. And while not every trace can be tied to epidemic disease, some researchers believe that crowded cities, combined with declining resources, created the perfect conditions for outbreaks. Stagnant reservoirs, once blessings of water, may have become breeding grounds for parasites and pathogens. I imagine a Maya marketplace, once lively with color and sound. Now, beneath the bright feathers and cacao stalls, whispers spread of fever. Neighbors coughing, children growing weak, priests offering sacrifices for healing. How quickly fear must have woven itself through the crowds. How quickly suspicion might have turned toward neighbors, rulers, even the gods themselves. I think of our own times, when illness swept the world not long ago. Streets fell silent, shops closed, families grieved. I remember sitting alone with Robert's photograph, listening to the news drone on about numbers, statistics, graphs. Yet behind each number was a life, a face, a love lost. The Maya must have felt something similar. Not numbers carved in stone, but empty mats where loved ones once lay, empty hands where laughter once belonged. There are scholars who suggest that diseases may have come from within, not from outside contact. Malaria, waterborne illnesses, or other endemic pathogens could have surged when famine weakened immune systems. Some even wonder if early trade brought new diseases across regions. The jungle, lush and beautiful, is also rich in unseen dangers. Mosquitoes, parasites, infections that thrive in warm, wet environments. One haunting possibility is that disease struck hardest at the heart of Maya ritual life. Imagine priests, entrusted with healing, powerless before unseen forces. Rituals of bloodletting and sacrifice, once believed to balance the cosmos, may have seemed suddenly ineffective. Faith itself could have wavered when the sick continued to die despite offerings. How heavy must it have been for a people who tied health so closely to divine order to watch that order unravel? And yet, as with war and drought, disease alone does not explain the full collapse. It may have been the final thread in an unraveling tapestry. Malnutrition from failed harvests, wounds from battles, and then fevers sweeping through weakened bodies. Collapse is rarely a single blow. It is many small fractures converging until the structure falls. I sometimes think about Robert's final illness. It was not one disease, not one sudden catastrophe, but a chain of frailties. An infection here, a failing organ there, until his body, once strong, could no longer bear the weight. Watching him decline was like watching a city fade. Each day another stone crumbled. Each night another silence deepened. The Maya must have felt that same helplessness, as illness joined drought and war to erode what they had built. What strikes me is how little we know for certain. Unlike battles carved into stele or droughts traced in lake beds, disease leaves only subtle marks. Perhaps the Maya never recorded their plagues. Or perhaps those records are lost in the jungle, waiting. It leaves us with questions that ache. Did families huddle together, trying to comfort the sick? Did rulers order quarantines? Or sacrifices? Or desperate rituals to cleanse the air? Did entire cities fall quiet as sickness spread through narrow streets? And if disease played its part, it forces us to reflect on our own vulnerabilities. We like to think ourselves masters of medicine, insulated by technology. Yet, as recent years have shown, even the strongest societies can tremble when illness strikes. The Maya remind us that fragility is eternal. That no pyramid, no knowledge of the stars, no wealth in jade or cacao can shield us from the breath of sickness. Still, the Maya left behind voices carved in stone, glyphs etched with care, codices painted with symbols. If drought, war, and disease tell one story, their records tell another. Of resilience, of meaning, of a civilization determined to be remembered. And so, in the silence left by their fall, we turn to their words to listen more closely. When the monuments ceased to rise, when the plazas emptied, what remained were the words the Maya carved and painted. Their glyphs, once a mystery to modern eyes, have slowly yielded their secrets. Each symbol is a voice across centuries, telling us not only of kings and wars, but of rituals, alliances, dreams, and fears. In those lines and curves, the Maya still whisper. The breakthrough in deciphering their writing is a story all its own. For years, scholars thought the glyphs were purely symbolic, decorative even, until the work of researchers in the 20th century revealed their phonetic depth. Suddenly, the stone spoke. Inscriptions once thought mute came alive with dates, names, and stories. We learned of dynasties spanning generations, of rulers whose lives were intertwined with cosmic cycles. It was as if a lost library had been unlocked, one carved not on parchment but on temples themselves. One of the most striking texts comes from Copán, where the hieroglyphic stairway stretches upward with thousands of glyphs. the longest Maya inscription known. There, the city's dynastic history unfolds step by step, each riser a chapter. But near the end, the text becomes disordered, fragments misplaced in a hurried reconstruction. It feels almost symbolic. A civilization once precise, losing its grip as collapse drew near. Beyond the Stelian stairs, there are the codices, bark paper books painted with vibrant glyphs and images. Only a handful survive today, the rest lost to time and conquest. In them, we glimpse the Maya mind. Astronomy tables mapping Venus, rituals for agriculture, prophecies tied to cycles of time. Imagine the priests turning these pages by torchlight, aligning human life with celestial rhythms. These books are as delicate as butterflies, and yet their survival is a defiance of centuries of loss. I often think about writing as a way of fighting silence. When Robert passed, I found myself writing letters to him. I never mailed them, of course, but I filled page after page with the small details of my day, the memories I wished to share. It was my way of carving glyphs on my own stairway, refusing to let my voice fade. Perhaps the Maya scribes felt the same. That to carve, to paint, to inscribe was to assert. We were here. We mattered. Among the lesser-known stories preserved in the glyphs are tales of queens, like Lady Six Sky of Naranjo, who ruled with strength in a world dominated by kings. Her inscriptions show her leading rituals, perhaps even commanding battles. Such glimpses remind us that Maya history was not only kings and wars but women whose power shaped destinies. How many more such voices are lost in codices burned, in glyphs buried under vines? Herodotus, Plutarch, Strabo. They were the voices we turned to in the tale of Alexander. For the Maya, we turn to their own words, though fragmented. And yet, even in fragments, they reveal resilience. They tell us that the Maya were not passive victims of fate, but people wrestling with drought, war, sickness, and still recording their place in the cosmos. But here lies the haunting gap. Just as their voices begin to trail off in stone, the collapse accelerates. Inscriptions grow fewer. Codices vanish. Was this because scribes no longer had the means? Or because faith in writing itself faltered? Did they sense their world unraveling and choose silence? Or were their voices erased by conquest? By flames that consumed bark paper books in later centuries? I sometimes hold Robert's old journal in my hands. His handwriting, so familiar, stretches across yellowed pages. Some entries stop mid-sentence, as if he was interrupted and never returned. Those unfinished lines ache more than the ones completed. The Maya glyphs are like that. Words begun, but never finished, leaving us with an ache of incompletion. And so, as we sift through their records, we are left with a paradox. The Maya are both present and absent, both loud in their glyphs and silent in their collapse. They left us stories, but not the ending. They left us calendars, but not the date of their last breath. And in that tension lies the enduring power of their mystery. As the lamplight flickers beside me, I close my eyes and imagine a Maya scribe, crouched at the base of a temple, carving with steady hand. Perhaps he pauses, listening to the distant cries of battle, or the silence of an emptying city. Still, he carves. Still, he insists on memory. And perhaps, across centuries, he whispers to us. Do not forget that the stones and codices gave us whispers. But the earth itself has begun to yield its secrets too. In the last century, archaeology has advanced from shovels and guesswork to technologies that pierce the very canopy of the jungle. LIDAR, light detection and ranging, has become one of the most astonishing tools, sweeping beams of light over forests and revealing entire cities hidden beneath the green. What once seemed like isolated ruins now appear as part of vast, interconnected networks of roads, temples, and reservoirs. The Maya world was larger, denser, and more complex than we ever dared imagine. I remember the first time I saw an image from a LIDAR survey in Guatemala. It looked like a ghost map. White outlines of temples and plazas emerging from the jungle, like bones under skin. Archaeologists had walked those forests for decades, stepping over roots and vines, unaware that whole cities lay beneath their feet. How many times in life do we walk over mysteries, blind to what is right below us? I sometimes think of the hidden compartments in Robert's old desk, where I once found a letter he had written to me when we were first courting but never gave. All those years, I sat at that desk and never knew. And when I found it, oh, how it felt like time itself had handed me a secret treasure. The modern digs have revealed new insights into Maya life. Vast causeways, straight as arrows, connected cities across miles of jungle. Agricultural terraces spread like patchwork, evidence of a people engineering landscapes on a monumental scale. Defensive walls, previously unknown, confirmed that war was not isolated but widespread. These discoveries reshape our understanding. The Maya were not scattered tribes but a civilization whose organization rivaled Rome or China. Excavations have also uncovered startling details about ritual life. In cenotes, natural sinkholes filled with water, divers have found offerings of jade, gold, ceramics, even human remains. These were not random sacrifices but carefully chosen gifts to the gods, especially the rain god Chak. It is chilling to imagine desperate priests casting treasures and lives into the depths, hoping to coax water from the sky. And yet, there is beauty too in that act of faith. The belief that connection with the divine could shift the course of nature. In Belize, archaeologists uncovered mass graves of young individuals, likely sacrifices. The bones bear signs of ceremonial treatment. To our modern eyes, it feels brutal. But to the Maya, it was cosmic balance. Sometimes, when I think of such rituals, I find myself torn between horror and awe. Horror at the suffering, awe at the depth of belief that drove them. I suppose faith always walks that edge. What are we willing to endure? Or to inflict? For what we believe matters most. The jungle has also preserved the smallest traces. Pollen grains revealing what crops were grown. Chemical residues in pottery hinting at cacao drinks spiced with chili. Murals showing nobles in radiant attire. Piece by piece, archaeology paints a picture not just of kings and collapse, but of daily lives. A mother grinding maize. A child chasing a ball across a plaza. A scribe bending close over a glyph. His hands steady even as the city trembled. And what of the cities themselves? Tikal, once thought abandoned and silent, has yielded new evidence of lingering populations, suggesting not total collapse but gradual decline. Chichen Itza, once imagined as a sudden replacement, now appears as part of a mosaic of shifting powers. The story is more nuanced, more layered than a simple fall. It makes me think of my own family history. My grandchildren sometimes ask why I keep old photographs of relatives they never met. I tell them that collapse is never the end. It is continuity in another form. The Maya did not vanish. They shifted, transformed, endured through their descendants. Just as my family endures through me. Through them. Through the stories we pass down. The modern archaeologists, with their drones and lidar, are like detectives of silence. They peel back the forest's cloak and let us glimpse the bones of a civilization still breathing in memory. And each discovery reminds us. History is not gone. It is only hidden. But even as new tools reveal new wonders, the great question remains. We have fragments of drought, war, disease, and ritual. We have cliffs, bones, and ruins. And yet, none of it gives us a single answer. The Maya story resists neat conclusions. It is as if they whisper. You may see the outlines, but you will never hold the whole. The more we learn, the less the story feels simple. Some scholars speak with conviction about drought as the main culprit. Others point to endless wars, tearing cities apart. Still others whisper of disease, of famine, of faith unraveling. But in truth, it seems all these threads wove together into the tapestry of collapse. Civilizations rarely fall from one blow. They falter when many small wounds bleed at once. I often think of it as a storm. Not a single thunderclap, but a gathering of clouds. First the skies dried, withholding rain for years. Then kings, desperate to secure food and power, turned their armies against neighbors. Disease crept in through weakened bodies, while hunger gnawed at the edges of every family. And all the while, the very belief that the gods would protect order began to crack. It was not one cause, but the weight of all causes together, pressing down until cities emptied and voices ceased. Archaeologists today speak of systems collapse. A society as complex as the Mayas relies on delicate balances. Food production, trade, political legitimacy, religious faith. When one falters, the others strain. When several falter at once, the whole web unravels. I think of my own life after Robert was gone. It was not only the loss of him, though that was shattering enough. It was how his absence rippled outward. Meals no longer cooked. Holidays no longer celebrated. Conversations no longer shared. One missing piece unbalanced everything else, until the whole rhythm of life collapsed. And yet, collapse is never total. Even amid ruin, the Maya adapted. Some cities endured, like Chichen Itza and Mayapan, shifting political structures, creating new forms of leadership. Some communities abandoned monumental building but continued to farm, worship, and raise children in smaller villages. Collapse, in this sense, was not an ending but a transformation. Their descendants live on, millions strong, still speaking Maya languages, still weaving the same patterns in cloth that their ancestors once painted on walls. It comforts me to think of collapse this way. Not as disappearance, but as change. When people tell me I live alone now, I smile softly and say, not quite. For Robert is here. In photographs. In memories. In the recipes I still cook. My children are here. Even if far away. In phone calls and holiday cards. My life has collapsed from what it was. But it has not vanished. It has shifted into something quieter. Smaller. But still alive. The Maya story is not one of extinction but of survival in different form. There are scholars today who warn against searching for a single answer. To do so is to miss the richness of the mystery. Instead, they urge us to embrace the complexity, to see in the Maya collapse a lesson. That civilizations are fragile when stretched too far. too proud, too reliant on perfect balance. The Maya remind us that greatness and vulnerability live side by side. And isn't that true for us as well? We build our own empires, houses, careers, families, and we think them solid. Yet droughts come in many forms: loss, illness, conflict, silence. Sometimes all at once. The Maya did not choose collapse, but they endured it. So too do we. What remains haunting is that they left no single explanation for us. No glyph saying, "This is why we left." No codex titled, "The reason we fell." Instead, they left us silence. And in that silence, room for us to wonder. Was it drought above all? War? Faith that faltered? Or was it simply the way all things must pass? Like the setting sun that always promises to rise again? I sit here now, in my quiet house, and I feel close to them. To the farmer who watched his maize fields dry. To the queen who led rituals in the shadow of hunger. To the scribe who carved glyphs on a stairway that would soon crumble. Their collapse is not foreign to me. It is the echo of every heart that has ever lost, endured, and carried on. And so, the debate continues, among scholars and storytellers alike. Perhaps the truth lies not in one cause but in the chorus of them all. Perhaps the Maya story is less about endings and more about endurance. Less about silence and more about the whispers that remain. And now, dear listeners, we circle back to where we began. In the quiet of my little room, the lamp dimming, the walls heavy with silence. I have walked you through droughts that scorched the land, wars that tore apart kings and kingdoms, sickness that crept unseen, and glyphs that whispered even as voices faded. And as I sit here, the story of the Maya mingles with my own. A tale of grandeur and collapse, of memory and silence, of endings that are never truly endings. What haunts me most is not the ruins themselves, but the absence of answers. To stand in Tikal or Copán is to feel the weight of emptiness. Stairways worn smooth by countless feet now moss-covered. Plazas where children once played now echoing only with bird calls. I imagine mothers who once hushed their babies in those very plazas. Priests lifting their hands to the sky. Rulers planning wars under carved ceilings. All of it gone. And yet, all of it here. Etched into stone. Into soil. Into the DNA of their descendants. Sometimes, in my loneliness, I think of myself as one of those temples. Walls still standing, but rooms emptied. Vines creeping quietly in the corners. When Robert died, when my children moved away, my own city fell silent. But like the Maya, I endure. I tell my stories. I keep the rituals of memory. Perhaps, like their glyphs, my words tonight are my way of carving into the stone of time. I was here. I mattered. And what of the Maya's lesson for us? That greatness can falter. That balance is fragile. That even the most radiant civilizations are not immune to the weight of change. But also that collapse is not disappearance. For the Maya live still in their descendants. In their languages. In the woven cloth and the rhythm of their prayers. They live still in the ruins that whisper. In the questions that stir our imaginations. Their civilization shifted. But it did not die. It comforts me to think of Robert that way. Too. His body rests beneath the earth. But he lives on in me. In our children. In the stories we share. His love lingers. As the Maya linger. In whispers. In fragments. in echoes that time cannot erase. So perhaps the mystery of the Maya is not just about why they fell, but about how we remember. How silence itself can speak. How ruins can still hold warmth. How endings can become beginnings. Their story, like mine, is one of loss, but also of survival, of transformation, of whispers that refuse to fade. The night grows long now, and my words slow, like the hush that settles after rain. We have walked together through jungles and ruins, through droughts and wars, through silence and whispers. And what we carry away is not certainty, but wonder. The Maya teach us that history is not only about answers. It is about questions that linger, gently, like shadows at dusk. So rest, my friends. Let the story of the Maya remind you that even in silence, life endures, memory holds, and mystery can be a kind of comfort. Close your eyes now. Let the weight of time drift softly over you. And dream of temples rising through the jungle. Of voices carved in stone. Of civilizations whispering still.